Welcome to Old Testament Tonight. I'm Allison Fisher.
And I'm Tony Clark. Unlike our last few sessions, we are finally starting on a more positive note.
Tonight we are discussing the restoration of Judah and the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Praise be, hallelujah, we are finally moving past the destruction, death, and rape of our previous texts.
Exactly, and we're focusing on growth and progress.
Ah! Yeah, so our text in Ezra and Nehemiah is starting around 539 BCE in a new era emerging from over 50 years of Babylonian rule.
Exactly, and the Persian ruler Cyrus, also known as Cyrus the Great, finally defeated the Babylonians and permitted those who were in exile to return home. This post-exilic time left Jerusalem with an overwhelming challenge, though, to rebuild their home and identity.
Yes, absolutely. And we actually have historical documents such as Cyrus's Cylinder, the Elephantine text, and our biblical texts that support a more insight into this new culture that had emerging civil and human rights that we hadn't seen before. This period also developed the literary formation of the Torah from the lay and priestly religious texts.
We also have the development of the Psalms. They are a rich and varied set of poems from the life in ancient Israel. They express many emotions such as supplication, lament, praise, and thanksgiving.
Yes, It's an exciting time.
It really
You know, Tony, my biggest issue with our texts from Ezra and Nehemiah and this Torah-centered community is the expulsion of the foreign wives and disruptions of these families for the purification and identity of the community.
I agree. For our time, it seems very unjust, but if you look at the context, it's somewhat understandable. Mm-hmm. They're really worried about keeping things pure, as you said, and now that women have legal rights to the land, they're worried about these mixed marriages and the foreigners gaining control of the Holy Land, which brings my biggest issue. Ezra and Nehemiah never really clarify who is pure and who is foreign.
I think it's interesting, though, that we're actually facing a very similar context in our own modern setting, and especially after our recent elections and seeing this drastic divide in our nation.
Exactly. It's really interesting how history repeats itself, but we have our classmates, we have a couple of them who are going to come help us bring a more modern context and modern opinion on the matter, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to Old Testament Tonight. Our nation and modern Christianity are still experiencing religiously influenced boundaries. So tonight we're here with a few of our fellow students who are graciously providing their own insight as to how we may move past these boundaries and promote more solidarity as a nation and as Christians. Claire, how do you feel we can promote and move past these boundaries?
Well, first of all, I think it's important for those of us on the more liberal side of the political spectrum to realize that it's never easy to hear those whom we call friend or those who we're related to call for a national purification with the rallying cry of "Make America Great Again." I think the first thing we need to realize is that we're having a different conversation. In order to heal any community that has been deeply divided, we need to first stop talking at each other and instead listen to each other. We need to listen to the reasons and the rationale. We need to listen past the hurt, the anger, and the resentment, and then and only then can we move forward together.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
And now we're here with Phil, who's providing his own insight for solutions.
Thanks, Allie. I think it's really important that we understand why people are drawn to purity in the first place. It's really a defensive concept. It's one that grows out of a sense of loss. And that loss could be real or it could be imagined. Back in the time of Ezra, it was a way for people to grapple with what was a devastated society. In our own time, I think people are similarly feeling threatened economically, socially, and so they revert back to this defensive posture. They tell themselves, if I can just purify the world around me, if I can just get rid of what I perceive as a corrupting influence, then I can reassert control and therefore sort of shape my own destiny. But the illusion, the problem with this is this idea that we ever had control over our own destiny to begin with. The forces that are at work in our world are incredibly complex, and if we think that purification or piety or any other sort of human activity is going to ensure a particular outcome, then we're just deceiving ourselves. So the path to inclusivity, in my view, is not really for some among us to lecture others about the merits of diversity. It really has to be a collective letting go of control. And sort of in doing that, we have to understand that we need to surrender the need to have a predetermined outcome, and to admit that any of our sort of feeble efforts as humans are really just vanity. It sort of goes back to what they say in Ecclesiastes, all is vanity. And some may see a sort of cynicism in that sense, but there's also a sense of surrender that could ultimately be empowering. Because if we surrender, if we let go of that control and understand that something like purification is really not going to get us anywhere, then there's nothing left to do but to rest and to celebrate and to just be present in the midst of something that's far greater than ourselves. And that's sort of how I understand the body of Christ.
Thank you for your wise words.
My pleasure.
And we're back. Now we're here with Isaiah, who's going to share his opinion on how we can move past political and religious boundaries as a nation and body of Christ.
So in Lakota culture, we have a phrase, mitaku e oyasin, and it can mean we are all related, all my relatives, or God bless all my relatives. And when we say we and relatives, we are talking about not just people, but plants and animals and all of creation. And as Christians or different denominations or different faiths or different political ideologies, we are called to be good relatives to one another. And that puts everything in a totally different light when you think of something as your relative or someone as your relative. And as you probably know, we don't always get along with all our relatives, right? But we still love them and we care about them. And that's kind of the direction I think we need to move if we want to coalesce.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on Old Testament Tonight with Tony Clark.
And Allison Fisher.
We really appreciate you tuning in on our segment of Rebuilding Community and look forward to seeing you next week.
See you then.